Hey, everybody, I hope you guys are doing great. So, it's been a very emotional week for a lot of people. So, I decided to make a bit of a timeless video, getting a lot of questions about that people have, rightfully so, about retrogrades in the birth chart and what they exactly mean. A lot of people are expressing frustration because they can't really get a lot of good information out there about what does it mean if I have my Mercury retrograde and my Jupiter retrograde. So, I figured let's take this opportunity. I did a full video on November. So before we get into the December energies, why don't we do a couple of these? I'm thinking we'll do some retrogrades this week, and I'm thinking next week we're going to crack open the good old Chiron. As an evolutionary astrologer, I do put a lot of weight on Chiron, which has to do with our deepest wound and where it is that we gain the greatest amount of wisdom in our life. And I kind of want to get hopefully in a very easy to digest way to really start teaching those of you who are just entering the realm of astrology, or those of you who have even been sort of playing around with astrology for a while, but you want to go deeper. You want to understand nodes and Chiron and all that stuff, right? So I'm hoping to sort of take everything a little bit deeper, right? So I want to start off with the retrogrades, though. I think retrogrades are very, very important. And what does it mean when we have, the word retrograde means obviously to go backwards. That's what it feels like, but it's not actually happening, right? What happens is it's, and we're just going to use, a reference that's used all the time when we're dealing with retrogrades in astrology is the idea of make believe you're in a train car, right? You're in a train, and then another train, you're going really, really fast. You're in the really fast train, and you're going right, but there's another train that's riding in an adjacent track, but your train passes that other one. Is that other train going backwards? No. But is it in your rearview mirror? Yes, right? But it's not going backwards. It's just that you're going so fast that energy is now behind you. So it's not a real retrograde as in it going backwards, but it is that kind of um, division between, let's just call it speeds, right? We don't have the full throttle of the sun to nurture us in that energy when something is retrograde. Now, a lot of us, not all of us, but most of us have at least one retrograde. A lot of people have between one and three. Some people have even more than that. So when you run your birth chart, right, there are a lot of free birth chart calculators out there. And if you run it Western Whole House, that's what I do, Whole House Astrology. When you see something that if you see your Mars or your Mercury, some free birth chart calculators will take it and they'll put it in a red hue to indicate that it's retrograde. Others will actually put a capital R with a little stick through it, right? Um, and that will indicate retrograde. So you're going to see at for the thumbnail of the video, I actually have the sign for retrograde, right? That you can reference if you're brand new to this. But all that means is you're not, if your Jupiter is retrograde, it's not a regular Jupiter retrograde. It's not a regular Jupiter placement. You have to understand what the retrograde means. Now, just because something is retrograde in your birth chart, two things I want to say. Number one, it's not the end of the world. A lot of times retrograde bring us extra gifts and abilities, right? And it doesn't mean that we could never have the full essence of what that energy is in our lifetime, particularly through the idea of progressions, not to get into the weeds of things, guys, but a progression in astrology is where like a day equals a year. And again, not to get into the weeds, but it does represent the psychological manifestation of a particular year, right? So it's very helpful for a lot of people to understand what progressed year they're in. So what basically happens is when we're born, we have the sun sign and rising sign and all these placements. As we live life and we mature and we go through lessons, psychologically we can evolve. It doesn't change our birth chart, but it changes psychologically how we engage with our chart. So even though we're born with something that's retrograde, we are meant to go through certain psychological lessons and sort of leveling up to the point where there's likely certain points in our life where we can sort of progress out out of what could feel like stagnated energy if we have a retrograde position, right? Um, Progressions are very interesting. For example, I'm Capricorn rising, but I'm in a progressed year where I'm actually a Pisces rising. And so, and not, if you knew me personally, you'd say, okay, no shock there. It's there, there's a lot going on for the in challenges and as well as beautiful gifts as well that are very connected to Piscean energy that is showing up on my path right now, right? And so, progressions are just something that's good to keep in mind. I don't want to make this all about progressions, but this is typically a follow-up. Whenever I discuss retrogrades, oh my goodness, am I stuck with it for my entire life? And I hate to even say it like that because it's not a negative thing. It just is. We don't have any bad placements or really good placements. They're just our placements. And it's just basically what we have to do. And how well we engage with it and how honest we are with ourselves, that's where we could start using words like good or bad or challenging or anything like that, right? Really does depend on us. So if you have this placement, doesn't mean that you're never going to evolve out of it. No, it does not mean that. That's number one. Number two, but keep in mind that we can never change our birth chart, right? The birth chart is always, what it is. And also, you know, everything that I'm going to be describing today, does it mean that all of those things are inevitably going to be your experience? And that would be no as well, because it does depend on your own personal birth chart. Some of the things that you hear me express as far as themes go for particular retrograde placements, maybe your experience as things that you see in other people. It's almost like those retrograde experiences are being mirrored to you through particular relationships or situations where it's still your experience, but it's your experience through another energy. So I hope I didn't confuse you there, but there's a lot to take into account when we're talking about retrogrades. I find them to be incredibly overlooked in astrology, incredibly overlooked. And the reason I'm saying this, and this is completely anecdotal, okay, based on my own experience as an astrologer, I work with a lot of people all the time for years now. And what I find is that's pretty much two main things are really not explained to people who have even had their birth chart done many, many times. And this is not to tell you to get your birth chart done by me at all. But I'm just saying, I want you to be mindful of this. When you're, if you're getting your chart done or you're just running your own chart, you want to pay attention to your retrogrades because this is not expressed a lot of times. A lot of astrologers don't focus on these. And you want to understand your degree placement. Right? Very, very important. And again, I don't want to make this all about degree placements, but if you have anything at like 27, 28 degrees, 29, 0, 1, or 2 degrees, you're not just that one sign, you're also the next sign as well. And as well as you have to understand the house placement, right? So really important to understand, guys. These are all important. So I'm not going to be breaking out the retrograde placements through house placements specifically. However, let me explain. If you have a retrograde energy, let's say you have, you know, Mars in the third house, right? So in the sign of Cancer, let's just say Mars in the third house in the sign of Cancer. So you have Mars in Cancer, but you experience it through the lens of Gemini. So you would also need to understand Mars in Gemini because Gemini is the landlord of the third house. You're not looking to confuse you guys. A lot of you guys know that, but it's very important to understand the house rulers and the house placements because the themes that I'm explaining now are just basically going to be about what it means to have Jupiter retrograde. I'm going to go a little more in depth. I'm actually going to address Black Moon Lilith as well as the nodes as well as Chiron. Okay, so I'm going to talk about this is information that's very hard to find generally on the internet. Not too many people talk about it enough, and it's really important to understand when we're trying to really understand ourselves. So just keep that in mind, right? Where I'm talking about the themes of it, but you have to understand your, what sign do you have it in? And then you have to understand your house placement. If I were to break it into that kind of video, we would be here for 10 million hours, I think. All right, so let's get into it. So just randomly, I am starting with Neptune retrograde. Starting with Neptune retrograde because that is one of my retrogrades. Actually, it is my only retrograde. Nope, I'm lying. I have Neptune retrograde and I have my nodes are retrograde in my birth chart. Okay, but we're just going to go through all of them. So we're going to start with Neptune, and I'm going to be referencing my notes here if you see my eyes looking away. So let's talk about this. First of all, what is Neptune? Neptune is the ruler of the 12th house. Neptune rules Pisces. Neptune is very connected to dreams, very connected to being very ethereal. It's very confusing. Neptune rules the bottomless oceans, rules the 12th house of again, of sleep, of dreams, very connected to the process of prayer. Neptune rules tarot, right? It rules where the veil is very thin between worlds. It does rule self-sabotaging behavior, victimhood, disease and disease. It rules addiction. It rules where we can wear rose-colored glasses a little too heavily. This is just generally Neptune direct, right? This is generally what Neptune represents, right? It's this idea of, you know, again, self-sabotaging behavior, where we could certainly get in our own way, where we have a really hard time exercising healthy boundaries, right? That's that Neptune energy. And it's very, very connected though, to how we connect with our intuitive side, with our intuitive nature. And it's very connected to creativity, how we understand faith, how we idealize situations that we come across in our life, whether it's a relationship, a job, whatever it is. So to have this energy retrograde in our natal chart could cause us to internalize that process. It could also cause you to have issues with the imaginative side, the imagination can make you feel very, very left brain, so to speak, right? Very left brain. Doesn't mean that you can't be. And of course, this depends on what else you have in your chart, right? If you have a lot of heavy Mercury ruled energy in your chart, you are going to be a little more creative, a little more inventive in that way, right? So you just, take it for what it is. Now, many lessons could come with any retrograde, and some of them can be a little stressful, but with Neptune, it could feel more confusing, right? Where you really are always doing your best to get through circumstances that are hard in your life, hard times. You could actually be quite the survivor in that way as well. And it isn't easy to have challenging placements, right? If we're going to call a retrograde challenging, because a lot of people do have that default kind of tagged to the idea of retrograde. One of the good things is about with this particular is about this acceleration of spiritual growth and becoming very connected to higher frequencies at an earlier age. And, a lot of you have been watching me for a while now. I got my first tarot deck when I was 9. I started studying astrology very seriously when I was 13. Really, really seriously before I was 18. To the point where I was, like doing old school like charts and all of that, really got very heavy into it. And it was like a natural gravitation for me, right? And so a lot of you may feel that as well. It's like it felt almost like as I was studying these things and I was learning the cards and I was learning the energies, it wasn't even like I felt like I was learning new work. It almost felt like I was coming home to something that I had been away from. I don't know if you have Neptune retrograde, you may very well feel that, right? That kind of energy where it's like there's not even a lot of effort involved. It's almost like this, it's so familiar. It's like, oh, I'm home kind of energy. Now, for me, it was like that in that particular realm because of other placements in my chart, but you could feel that as well, where something comes very naturally to you. Now, let's talk about some of the experiences here, right? And just keep in mind that the reason why, any retrograde is so intense is because that retrograde energy is on the other side of the sun, right? And so because of that, you can easily experience the entire energetic field of, in this case, like Neptune, going retrograde. You could feel all of it. You could feel it really, really intensely and everything that it represents. because sometimes, the sun will help mitigate some, with its solar energy, the sun will help mitigate, right? But with the retrograde, it's sort of like we're hit with these things, kind of head on, right? So let's talk about these themes that you could easily experience with this energy retrograde. Neptune is all very intuitive in its expression, right? We know that as the ruler of the 12th house, as the ruler of Pisces. So when it's retrograde natally, it can easily cause you to actually suppress your spiritual side. My cat is crying like crazy outside. Sorry about that if you hear it. She wants to come in. You may tend to live in the land of make-believe. So, in other words, you can go through bouts of being disconnected from reality and escaping through daydreams, escaping through sleep. It's very common for this placement as well to be like, okay, I know I need to work on this thing. Let me go like lay down with my feet up for 15 minutes and sort of go into that space to sort of get yourself ready, right? And that's a very common occurrence with Neptune retrograde. Neptune retrograde can also cause you to feel kind of blurry and have a hard time deciphering fact from belief. Natal Neptune retrograde can cause you to feel lethargic, so you could feel sluggish at times when it comes to actually being a go-getter and taking action. It doesn't mean that you won't, but it'll come in like spurts, and there could be a lot of fear sort of underneath that as well. Confusion and this weird, I say weird because it's not really weird. It's a fear that's confusing that you might not even be able to put your finger on it, that could get in the way of you being able to go after. Now, it depends on what your Chiron is because everything's connected. If it's Chiron in Aries or Chiron in Pisces, if that's what you have in your birth chart, you might not feel like you are deserving of something, or that something's going to roll out the way, or that that either you're deserving or that it's going to go the way that you really wish it to go. These kind of false, horrible narratives that we tell ourselves, right? That really has to do with our wounded inner child and a whole host of things that we'll talk about at a later date. But it's important to understand that none of these things live in a vacuum, right? But it can give you that kind of sense of I'm not sure why I feel like this. I'm not even sure why I have this fear. I'm just afraid of ultimately, being victimized by a situation again. So that can put the kibosh in your energy when it does come to actually going after something, right? In a way that you feel like you really want to. Now, enmeshment in relationships can also be a thing for you until you break that pattern, especially with those in your immediate family, whether it's your siblings or whether it's the family that you live with, at the later point, right? It could certainly end up manifesting like this, right? This kind of enmeshment situation. Where do you end and your children begin? And where do you end and your parents begin, or your siblings, right? You get the idea. Now, you can also go through extremes with your sleep, and you can have very, very cinematic dreams, or on the flip side, go through periods of time where you feel like you lack imagination. But it's interesting because you could go through years of just being so in your imagination, so prolific in any sort of creative endeavor, and then go through years of what you would call like maybe writer's block, or just a dry period where you just can't access it. It's like you just can't if you're trying to do it the same way. So it's so important to understand these things, right, within self. So you'd be like, okay, listen, my Neptune retrograde is acting up. Maybe I'm dealing with some sort of transit that's speaking to it. So let me figure out a different strategy of approaching it, right? I mean, that's why we want to use astrology to understand, things like that and how to handle it. You can be overly sacrificing and deny yourself comfort or even compassion for the sake of helping other people, definitely something that I suffered with for a long time, always giving, giving, giving to other people, right? It's also why I have my South Node in the 11th house. That's something that I had to really work on, is not always giving and worrying about everybody else. First of all, worrying whatever the people think, but giving of myself, right, to other people, or for other circumstances other than myself, being overly concerned with other people rather than myself, and not in a selfish way, but just like in a self-loving way, So that's something that's really very, very common with this placement. At times, there's a tendency to deny your own reality or have others do the same, and it could be through gaslighting. So if you have Neptune retrograde, you could certainly gaslight. You could be on the receiving end of gaslighting as well. Could certainly be this kind of reciprocal thing, but it's something that's not unusual to your energy. Now, especially because Neptune rules Pisces, it depends on what else you have going on in your Pisces energy. Um, like for me, I have Chiron in Pisces, right? That's where my Pisces placement is in my third house. So I did experience a lot of gaslighting from my siblings. I experienced a lot of gaslighting from extended family. I did. Um, and then when I got smarter, I kind of learned how to play their game right back at them, which actually is not anything that I'm proud of, right? But it's always about survival, right? It's always about survival and needing you figure out how to play somebody at their own game, right? Typically not the person who instigates, but once you figure out what's going on, don't even try. That person is going to come after you times 10. Right? If you have your Neptune retrograde, you're going to be that. You can easily be that person, right? Because you get smart about it. You don't allow yourself to stay in that space. Now, there are moments of stagnation and creativity, and you could sometimes have access, again, with that imagination as well, sort of another version of what I was saying earlier. Like, you can't access it. It's not even like it's not just coming to you, there's an access issue. So don't try to push it. Do something else. Be creative in a different area. Whether it's through, for example, if you're trying to be very creative, I don't know, writing a creative piece of fiction, do some sort of writing having to do with facts, having to do with something like that. And you will circle back, and that will, your imagination will come back tenfold and it'll come back really powerfully, but don't try to push it. If you're having writer's block, if you're having painter's block, if you're having any sort of creative block and anything like that, go and busy yourself doing something else, right? Because there's no value add in trying to push something there. You're wasting your time, right? You want to be careful of checking out of responsibilities when you don't want to deal with the hard stuff in life. So escapism could certainly be an issue. And a really good way of dealing with this is as something comes up, deal with it. Do not procrastinate and let that become your new mantra. This is very easy to procrastinate, making that phone call, dealing with that email, dealing with whatever it is. To retrain yourself, because that's like a natural default, right? So you want to just get into doing that. There could be problems with empathy that come up with this kind of retrograde. You could go from extremes of having an overabundance of compassion for people to a lack, which causes you to not caring about others. And it's not even that you don't care so much as like, I mean, where it's like there was this understanding that when you needed the world and the world didn't have your back, you understood that pain. And so when then people are asking you for support and help, it's not that you don't want it, but it's like if you see them self-sabotaging themselves so clearly, it's very, very difficult for you to be able to tolerate their self-sabotage when you've told them time and time again, all you need to do is X, and they keep doing Y. And but yet they still want this compassion from you. It's very difficult for you to tap in to the empathy at that point. It is because you have been a warrior spirit in your life and you've had to, experience being dejected and then being able to figure out your own new normal and figure stuff out for yourself. And when, especially when it's done by people who have hurt you in some way, it's very difficult for you to get back on that bandwagon and feel sorry for them. It's not that you're a mean person, it's just that you've been hurt, and that hurt can actually block you from being able to access that. It's almost like you have the t-shirt, been there, done that, and it's like, okay, you have to just move on, and that's you're going to vacillate between that and then having a bleeding heart for people who are in pain, especially if it has to do with pain that you really resonate with, right? You can have a lot of empathy in that space. You can feel a lot of empathy for people who are gaslit and people who are where you see a lot of unfairness going on, that could really strike a chord. Like you can have very low tolerance for things that are unfair. Um, Hypochondria can tend to come up quite a bit with this retrograde placement. And regarding faith, there can be a lot of doubt in yourself and in humanity and in religion. In the traditional sense, anyway, you will likely have your own version of religion. Again, not to make this about me, and I'm only going to reference it with this one. I'm just using myself as an example. I was raised Roman Catholic. I went through all kinds of away from Catholicism, and I looked into, what is the Protestant faith? What is Buddhism? I was a Buddhist for 6 years. I, went through all different kinds of things, and trying to sort of figure out where I land. And you know, all of the different religions that I looked into, they all sort of at least mention Jesus Christ, right? So for me, it made sense to go back to the faith that I was raised in. That's what worked for me. But a lot of the elements within the organized religion didn't make a lot of sense to me, right? Especially saying that astrology is like evil and sorcery and everything. And so I know it's not. I've always understood from, and this just came upon me, and I clearly remember being in the third grade. Um, Understanding the sky to be God's workshop. And those of you who work with me privately, I reference it a lot like that, where the planets and the stars and everything in the sky that's offered to us, though that's God's workshop. And that's how we can help better understand the navigation of the life that we've been given. So I have my own. I believe in God, and I absolutely believe God created everything, and I don't believe that we just spontaneously arrive. This is not my belief system. This is nothing against anyone who believes that. But for me, I do believe in God. I do believe that Christ was the Son of God, and I take that very seriously. And astrology brings me closer to God. But say that to anybody in a church, and they'd be like, blasphemous. Like, okay, man, you do you, know what I mean? I just don't, I just don't believe that, right? So, and I'm just giving this as an example. Hello, can't even think of it, but it could easily be, anything that really has to do with, your beliefs and your spirituality and your core values. You could just kind of go to the beat of a little bit of a different drum, when it comes to your politics and your societal beliefs and whatever it is, right? So a very kind of like a very open energy there. When you can access your vivid side, your imagination can absolutely be really unbelievably colorful, unbelievably, like you go there. A lot of very creative energies have, their Neptune retrograde. A lot of creative directors, a lot of creative artists. Now, there is a tendency to fall into victim mentality, or the tendency to be victimized by others. And this is really just something that's got to be worked through in this lifetime as well. And what's really helpful is to understand that there is no such thing really as a victim. There are circumstances that can be very undesirable, but there are lessons in that. And the lesson, unfortunately, may not always be our own. Maybe we're part of a lesson that somebody else needs to learn as well. But in the scheme of life, it could feel uncomfortable in that way. But the best way to utilize this is just say there are no victims here. I have myself in this relationship, this situation, this circumstance for a larger reason that I may not understand right now, and I might not even understand in this lifetime, but it doesn't mean that it's not there, And I know that's really difficult for a lot of us to fully understand, but eventually, what is beautiful about this energy, the more we engage with it, this is healing, the healer energy. Neptune retrograde is the energy of the healer, of the musician, of the poet, of the actor or actress, the singer, the writer, the artist, the astrologer, the psychic. mean, that's what this energy is. So, and, it doesn't mean, right, that you're always going to have a rough time or you'll always meet others who have bad intentions. You are going to meet people with bad intentions. You are going to have open enemies in life. I mean, this is just the way it goes. But it doesn't mean that everybody is going to be like that. Dealing with the chronic boundary issues is difficult. Yes, where do you begin? Where the other people begin? Just do the best you can to set healthy limits, take ownership, take responsibility, and just be very mindful. Once you realize this, just be very mindful of how it is that you navigate these things. Moving forward, and when Neptune goes retrograde, you probably are very comfortable with that energy where other people may not be, quite as much so, right? But that is what I have for you guys for Neptune retrograde. I hope this was helpful in some way, and I will see you guys next time. We're going to talk about Pluto retrograde next. Okay, so let's talk about Pluto retrograde. So Pluto being retrograde is it happens, first of all, it happens. And this is kind of a big deal for you, those of you who have Pluto retrograde, to know, just because Pluto is on the move right now. Pluto finally came out of retrograde recently. Now, if you have Pluto retrograde natally, it was probably pretty comfortable for you to go through the Pluto retrograde that we just recently had. But because Pluto is changing signs, a lot of what I'm is going to Aquarius this week, next week, and it's going to be in there for the next 20 years. So that Aquarius energy is going to be very, very activated for you guys. And so a lot of these retrograde themes that I'm about to discuss are really going to become very prevalent when it comes to your experience and what it is that things that you need to look at and things that you need to sort of navigate through. Now, this planet is how we go through our own metamorphosis. It's where we dig deep and where we work through repressed emotions. So having this energy retrograde can cause these ideas to become a lot more internalized, right? As all retrogrades do, this idea of being internalized, or at least in some way repressed. So as a result, being born with Pluto retrograde, this can really create some challenges in your ability to access your ability to transform, and a lot more difficult for you to step into your personal power. Now, I'm going to tell you what's a little tricky about this one is Pluto retrograde straight out of the gate. You do not like to be controlled at all, at all. You don't want to be controlled with money. You don't want to be controlled in relationship. You don't want to be controlled by other people. You just do not want to be controlled. So, I mean, that could always be, oh, interesting. I guess an important message is coming out. I don't know if you could hear it, but my printer is just randomly starting on its own. So it's, you gotta love it. It's randomly, I don't know what it's printing out, but anyway, having this energy net retrograde could feel kind of heavy. Pluto's a very heavy energy anyway, but it really deserves recognition because it is your avenue to your Phoenix energy, right? This idea of being able to tap into and utilize your own capability of being able to rebirth and transform and bring new energy to yourself. So let's kind of talk about some themes. I mean, I feel like we could talk all day long about leading up to what these things mean, but let's just get to the themes, right? Some of the ideas, some of the experiences that you're likely gonna, and remember now, these are lifelong placements. So a lot of you may be like, yes, I've been dealing with that. And now when Pluto goes into Aquarius, which represents new and novel for the future, you might be really looking at these retrogrades so much so that you're like, yes, this is not an issue for me as much anymore. Again, you don't really get rid of it. Maybe you're going into a progressed season in your life, whatever it is, right? Let's just understand what the themes are. So to begin, there's likely times when you have a really difficult time facing things from the past, where you hold on to traumas without dealing with it until it has to come to the surface, until something else brings it to the surface, right? So it could be, and I'm just going to give an easy example here where maybe you went through something in your childhood that you repressed, right? Because Pluto energy is very connected to this idea of everything that we haven't healed from our early environment, from our past lives. And then suddenly something comes up with one of your own children. And it's almost like it brings up this really crazy fear in you. And it's not so much the circumstance that's going on with your child as much as what it's waking up in you that you have to look at from your own childhood, right? To be healed, right? I mean, it's only being raised to the surface in order to be healed. Now, often you may struggle to break old patterns, preoccupations, and desires as well. There could be power issues that come up a lot in this energy. There's no question because you need to balance it on both sides, right? You need to learn how to step into your own personal power, but not in a way that's going to cause you to be like a tyrannical, crazy monster, right? There's got to be some sort of like balancing out, no shade, but you know what I mean? Like, where is that point of balance where you're feeling in power, but meanwhile, you're not at the same time putting the kibosh on anybody who's trying to have any sort of agency, right, with you in life. I'm not talking about over you. So about having agency with you, right? In like a symbiotic relationship. Are you putting the kibosh where there's a lot of you're trying to control me, or you feeling like you need to have the greatest level of control, the heaviest hand of control in a particular situation, right? So you just want to be careful of that because control issues just generally can come up when it comes to anything, where there's this lack of autonomy in your own life, right? If you feel like you have a lack of autonomy, man, can this twist you out. You don't like, I mean, it is a different level of uncomfortable for you. To the point where you could feel like you need to dominate everyone and everything around you. And again, it's not because you want to be difficult. It's not because you want to be malicious. It's not. It's just that you have to understand Pluto is so controlling. Pluto is control. Pluto is also anxiety. And so when you have this energy retrograde, it's like, I have to control myself. I have to control what's in here. If I don't control, then somebody else is going to have control and they're going to hurt me, or they're going to abuse me, or they're going to do X, Y, and Z. And that could be because that was your experience either in a past life or in an earlier circumstance in your life. So this idea of control issues can come up. Another thing is detoxing the things that accumulate in your life is absolutely crucial. It is so paramount for you to detox anything that is not serving you in order to level yourself up. Because you're going to be a little more sensitive to the junk in your trunk, right? You know what I mean? Like this stuff that's just laying in your basement that you haven't dealt with from your past. It's going to weigh heavier on your energy than it would on somebody else's. Now, feeling singled out and like someone who tracks plutonic types is probably likely. You just feel like, why do I seem to attract all of the people who have been in prison or who have done who do drugs or drink too much or who just have problems? Or why am I attracting people who like to live on the periphery of society? And it's like the quintessential bad boy kind of thing. It's like, why do I find myself attracting those energies? I'm getting really in touch with why is that actually, right? Because there's a reason, right? Where we attract these people who we might now could be for a couple of reasons. It could be because you don't feel like you're deserving of somebody who's not like that. It could be because you feel like you have to settle up some score from a past life. It could be that you get into these circumstances with people who are less than ideal because you know damn well it won't work out, and therefore you won't need to let yourself be more vulnerable. And so if you don't need to let yourself be a certain level of vulnerable, that means that you're going to keep control of your own self. Because when we allow ourselves to be completely loved in the most organic way, that means we have to allow ourselves to be very vulnerable and open, which means we're not going to have total control. And very few things freak out a Pluto retrograde than that. right? So you really have to look at that. You can even be like that in friendships and stuff, right? Where it's that Pluto retrograde makes you feel like you protect thyself at all costs, and you don't realize it though. This is the crazy thing is you don't realize it. It's like, and it's the very thing that you are poo-pooing off, right? This idea of not allowing yourself to be more vulnerable, but yet it's like to feel unconditionally loved and accepted is the very thing that you deeply crave. So there's got to be some sort of working out of those energies, right? In that space. Manipulation could be an unconscious thing where you find yourself doing it to people or others to easily sway them. You can have a more challenging time connecting with your conscious and subconscious, that could definitely be a thing. You just have a hard time. Um, so much so to the point where you could feel like the two different animals, right? Your conscious mind and your subconscious mind. And a lot of people with Pluto direct, there is some sort of connection there, but for you, it could be very, very different. Where you could say in your conscious mind, I know what's wrong and right. I know what's good for me and not right. But then in your subconscious, or it can be vice versa, you could be just feeling this pull to doing something that maybe would not serve your highest good, that would maybe, challenge societal norms, challenge things that could be dark, that could be compromising, right? Even though your mind is telling you one thing, it's like your subconscious is telling you something very different. It can be very like that good angel, bad angel kind of thing, so just something to be mindful of. You can have a hard time dealing with people who try to dictate your life, but that feeds into the whole power struggle thing as well. There could be times where you're blocking your own transformation process and, you know, um, where you need to change, but you hold on to things a little too tightly, all right? Because it's very connected to this idea of fear, connecting, where you don't know how to like let go of things. It's important to understand also then where your Sedna is in your birth chart as well, which is this asteroid that's very connected to the idea of just knowing when things need to be let go of, but we have a hard time doing that, right? Um, you have a very powerful talent for going down to the depths and connecting with hidden knowledge. Pluto retrograde energies are very, very good with anything in the occult, very good astrologers, very good um natural for you to get into like detective work, um psychology. Pluto retrogrades make really good psychologists, excellent. Being able to actually and I know this is going to sound crazy, but being able to see, there's a lot of Pluto retrogrades love going to yard sales and flea markets and stuff. And I know this sounds very random, but because they can look at something that's old and tattered and they have the ability to reimagine it and bring it back to life. I mean, what is more Plutonian than that, right? Taking something that's like kind of old and broken down and bringing it back to life. They make great Pluto retrograde energies make great like interior designers, going in and like updating something, redoing furniture, uh, reimagining something, bringing it more, giving it a new life, right? So, taking like trendy antique jewelry, right? And then somehow modernizing it and bringing it new life, right? You get the idea. So anything like that as well. The need for more sleep, where it's time to regenerate and recover so that you can build yourself back up. Very important. Sleep is very important if you have your Pluto retrograde, really. Your level of focus can go through extremes in terms of getting fixed on a particular subject, person, or hobby. Like you could become really obsessed with something. Could be, especially Pluto retrograde, because Pluto does rule astrology. It also rules finances. It rules other people's finances in the stock market. I have a lot of clients with Pluto retrograde. They are set that like stock market crazy, right? Investments, you know, uh, anything having to do with psychology, the afterlife, even if it's not what they do for a living. Astrology, obviously, anything like that, but you'd be very fixed on it. And once you balance your energy out, you will. Once you balance your energy out, you could become highly skilled at the powers of observation. That's why Pluto retrogrades honestly make the best detectives and such good, again, psychologists. There are latent psychic abilities that could come in waves before you can access it. So this is very confusing for a lot of people I work with who have Pluto retrograde because they'll know that they're getting a message, but they have no idea where it's coming from, what to do with it, or what it means. But yet there's like this intuition that that smell or that temperature that they felt, or that just that vibe that they felt, or the replication of numeric patterns, songs, smells are a big thing here. They know there are messages, but they don't know what it is. That's okay. Stay open to it because it will all eventually make sense to you. It will all just try not to figure it all out right away, right? You want to be careful of that, right? Where, just for example, you know, I'm just trying to think of an easy example for you to. Okay, I'm going to give you an example. So one of my clients was having a lot of dreams about, this is so weird, but it sounds weird, right? But having a lot of dreams about feet, right? Feet, the whole idea of feet. Feet are foundational in astrology, but they represent other things as well. They're actually how we access wisdom, right? But this one of my clients, this Pluto retrograde, she kept having these uh dreams about feet. And though because she was having a lot of dreams about feet, and she even thought it was funny and strange, but she was noticing feet more, but obviously it was on her mind. And then she kind of did her own interpretation and said, well, this means that I'm very focused on creating a strong foundation for myself, right? But it ended up being like 2 years later, and I was telling her, like, don't be married to that. Like, you don't want to, just because you had the experience right away, you don't want to marry yourself because there are several different interpretations. You kind of have to wait for more signs. And it was difficult for her to do because she had a lot of earth in her chart and she wanted to know the answers. And so, but the bottom line is she ended up realizing like 2 years later, yes, it was really about this idea of walking into wisdom, right? And there were many other signs that came up that she ended up staying open to, but it wasn't for another 2 years that she realized that she was meant to walk towards her North Node, which was really to get more into spiritual work when she was doing something very corporate, right? But with this Pluto retrograde, it was like she was having a hard time understanding the signs, but she was trying to have them mean something too soon. So when you get these energies of downloads, write them down and bank them, and then pay attention, and eventually everything will sort of fit together. I hope that makes sense. I hope I didn't confuse anybody. I don't think I did, because if you have Pluto retrograde, I suspect that you know exactly what I'm talking about. Hidden abilities can sometimes emerge from experiencing transformative times. And I see this time and time again. Getting a divorce, going through a profound death experience with someone who a significant person in life. Losing a job, losing a home, something very transformative, but it's like something profound that's life-changing comes out of it that ends up becoming such a blessing in life. And once you're connected with your Phoenix energy, you can make, again, excellent detective, psychologist, everything that we've been talking about, hypnotherapist, researcher, even a doctor, anything in the occult, anything having to do with psychic, anything having to do with analyzing. So that would even kind of segue into the realm of science as well, very much so. But it's all about evolution. So really allowing yourself to evolve and allowing yourself to grow and seeing where those sticking points are. So I hope this was helpful for those of you who have Pluto retrograde. Thanks for hanging with me, and I will see you guys next time. Okay, so let's talk about Uranus retrograde, right? Uranus is the big revolutionary energy, loves to keep things fresh, loves to stay true to, his authentic self. Very sovereign soul, I always say, know where your Uranus is, know where your Aquarius is, because Uranus rules Aquarius, bottom ruler of Aquarius, and just love the hell out of it, right? Wherever it is. It's interesting though, because Uranus energy is like this, again, very revolutionary energy, but having it retrograde can actually be a little more Saturnian, can make you feel a little more like, I could do this, I could do this, I could do this. Wait, I can't do this anymore. I have to get out of here. And I've used this example a couple of times before I get into the themes of everything. But I have a client who I was working with her a couple of years ago, and well, I still work with her, but this happened a couple of years ago, and she she was in a marriage that had normal marriage issues. She had a few kids. She liked her life. It wasn't that she was overtly unhappy. It wasn't that. But she just felt like, like something was missing, but she was going along to get along and doing what she had to do, doing what she had to do. And I had a session with her, and then maybe it was about a week, 10 days later, um, she calls me from the airport that she got a one-way ticket to Italy and that she wasn't coming back. And she's like, I'm probably eventually going to come back. But I was like, oh my gosh. I was like, how did your husband, your kids take it? She hadn't even told them. So she goes to Italy and she works in a tourist town for 3 months. She rents a room. She makes money that way, speaking English in a tourist area. She sort of got her head together. She just needs to kind of rethink life. She came back. Obviously, she called her family when she got there, so they knew that she was okay. But she didn't pass it by them. Just it was just like that's such a Uranus retrograde kind of thing when it's got a heavy aspect to it, right? And it was being aspected very heavily by the transiting Uranus at that point. So it was like this literal, like she couldn't stay in that situation anymore. And she had to get out of there. And obviously, not everybody is going to experience that, but this is what happened for her. And it ended up being a really good thing for her. It was what she needed. She came back, whatever. Her and the husband, they went to couples counseling, family therapy, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, that was her story. But that's an experience, that's certainly a Uranus retrograde experience when it's heavily aspected. So, with this one, really, because it's all about change and because it's retrograde, there could be challenges when it comes to embracing change. You could even have an aversion to it, or be so unpredictable, right? As in the case with my client at certain times, where you can actually make other people feel uncomfortable. Right. So having Uranus retrograde could affect you to the point where you feel restricted and a lot more internalized, even a little bit more restricted than you actually are, right? So let's talk about some themes or experiences that you may go through, and just to validate and just to kind of call out, what these experiences might be for you. The main issue with this particular placement is being yourself, which could fluctuate from not expressing yourself authentically to being very outside of the box with your personality. You go from one extreme to the other. Your mind could be overly radical compared to a person whose natal Uranus is direct, okay? Um, your way of expressing yourself could come across again as more Saturnian, as I mentioned a moment ago, not only feeling very Saturnian, but the way you express yourself, which could cause others to feel that you're very close-minded and very standoffish. In fact, some people could even tell you that you're rather like cold, or you don't invest in things deeply enough, right? Idiosyncrasies could be more pronounced in your mannerisms. So there can be something very unique. And it depends, obviously, what house you have it in. If you were to have this in your first house, maybe there's a unique, something very sort of it's a syncrasy when it comes to the way you walk or the way you dress or the way you present yourself to the world in one way or another. It doesn't mean it's bad. It just means it's different. Okay. You tend to feel like an outsider in social situations, in work, even within your family. Especially with like extended family, you could definitely feel like an outsider. Even if you're not, you feel like that. At times, you are noticeably detached from yourself and others. And because you are so different, you could experience periods of alienation, even if you live with a lot of people, whether it's a roommate or your family or your spouse or your children, whoever it is. Now, there can be a tendency here to be reluctant to try new things or suppress your experimental side to the point of being stagnant. And this is something that's very common when we have Uranus retrograde, it's like this real discomfort with trying new things, feeling so proud of yourself for just trying new foods, trying new experiences, doing those things. You may even find that at a certain point in your life, you push yourself to do those things where it's like, where it's just like not even a thought to somebody else. You're like, no, I'm going to make myself go and do this thing, try this food, visit this place, whatever it is, where you have to sort of psych yourself up. It's like, no, I'm gonna make myself be more social now. I'm really gonna push myself to try different foods. I'm gonna push myself to visit different places that maybe I don't want to do. I'm gonna push myself to be more engaged in conversations that really don't interest me, just out of respect for the other person. Because it's never that you aren't respectful or that you don't care. It's really not. It's just that a lot of times you don't see the point. A lot of times you don't. A lot of times you will not see the point to sharing with other people things about yourself that you feel like they're not going to care about. And you could feel like people really don't care about you that much. Me, especially in social situations. This is not to say that you don't feel loved. You know when people love you. It's not to say that at all. But where you could feel like in a group of people, you could feel a little invisible, or you could feel like people aren't really listening to you, or they don't fully give you their full attention, right? That kind of thing. That's an icky feeling, right? But a lot of times it could be just that vulnerability stepping in more than it being reality. Um, Acceptance for yourself and others for being outside of the norm tends to be really complicated. It's an interesting thing because you could find yourself very attracted to people who are outside of the box, who are very different, who are very not following societal norms. But then another part of you has a hard time exercising, not following societal norms when it comes to your own stuff, when it comes to being out in society. So it's like you're very accepting, loving, and giving, but then you wonder if other people accept that in you. I hope that makes sense. It's very interesting. It's a complicated kind of thing. You might feel more anxious than most with a ton of nervous Uranian energy because, Uranus rules. It rules technology, right? So you can have a very natural understanding of things that are very techy, or you might even have a hard time. It depends on what else is in your chart, but there could be a very like a real thing when it comes to the idea of technology, right? Genius level energy or a real aversion to it, right? Again, it depends on what else is going on there. But that nervous energy that's very Uranian. So you can have a lot of anxiety from that. You feel a lot of anxiety around friendships, or, when you think about your future, your goals and gains, you could feel a lot of anxiety around that. You could go through extremes of wanting to fit in and then really not giving a crap about it at all, quite frankly, right? Where you just really don't care. There is a tendency to disassociate to the point that you disconnect from your own body. So you could get very involved in things where you could easily feel a disconnect to your body. And so you want to be very mindful of that, right? Really getting back in touch with your body, taking really good care, not treating your body as other. So really making sure that you take really good care of your health, taking good care of your skin, taking good care of your tangible body, right? Everything that you feel and see, and not just letting yourself go. Because a lot of people with this energy retrograde, they'll forget to shower, or they'll forget to like something will come up on their body, and they're like, oh, whatever, they won't bother, looking into it. They don't really care, or whatever, right? Then once you sort of get in tune with it, then you could actually become obsessed with those very things that you didn't care about, right? So there is this vacillation between the two. So just be mindful of that, right? At certain points. And again, it doesn't mean that you never shall, but it's always you could forget. You could forget these things. You could forget to you could also have very sort of out of the box relationships with your friends as well. Um, there are times where your hand gets forced so that change can occur. It's super common. where you don't want to create change until you're pushed to create the change. You can go through bouts of suppressing your brilliance for long periods of time, long periods of time. And but yet it's like you feel it within you. You're unbelievably smart. I mean, that's something that you have to understand. I'm not just saying that because I'm talking to you. You are. I mean, this is like a brilliant energy. You have a way of being in tune with the collective consciousness in a very different way. Now, this is very profound for those of you who have interests in technology, advances in science, advances in, anything having to do with medicine, having to do with the masses, having to do with social warrior situations. I mean, you could be unbelievably brilliant in these particular areas. You just see things differently. You're very tuned in. It's really cool. Now, frequently, you ignore wake-up calls until you have no choice but to make changes. Kind of going back to that point of, your hand gets forced so that change can occur. And when you are receptive, your mind is constantly downloading information and strokes of genius. And with this energy internalized, you eventually become amazing at Uranian topics, like I've been talking about. Again, science, astrology, even astronomy, being a solopreneur, right? Like seriously, like working just on your own, and you sort of freelance or being self-employed, working online, new age, anything new age, anything in the tech field, any kind of inventor, any kind of trend setter. This idea of taking something like it's this energy and Pluto retrograde energy are the two retrogrades where it's just like upgrading old models, upgrading old ways of doing things, upgrading. And this could be just something so basic as taking I don't know, a pencil and creating some sort of amazing new pencil, right? Or anything like that. So brilliant when it comes to this. Because this is the energy of revolutionary energy, revolutionary change, and all of that, eventually you will undergo a significant upgrade in your life. You will, and you're going to break free from restrictions. And, you know, and a question I get a lot having to do with this, because it's a brilliant energy, Uranus. If I have it retrograde, does it mean that I can't access that energy? No, that is not the case, right? You are the hidden genius of the zodiac, honestly. And once that Uranus energy does wake up in you, it allows you to align with those abilities that you have. And you're also going to do better than most when it comes to acclimating to things that are new. And I don't mean new experiences as far as like a new home or anything like that, but things that are new in society and new out in the world, you will acclimate rather quickly to it. Like trends in technology or things going on out there in the world. It's easier for you to acclimate quite easily to those changes, less so to more personal changes, right? If that makes sense. But yeah, very interesting placement. There's no question about it. And you're really going to be feeling it now, because this year you're really going to be feeling it, because Uranus is going to be changing houses for the first time in several years. It's going to be changing in August of 2025. It's going to be going from Taurus into the sign of Gemini. So those retrograde themes are going to be activated. So, just keep that in mind. And also, because Uranus controls, rules Aquarius, natural ruler of Aquarius, and Pluto's going into Aquarius, expect there to be a lot of kicking up, a lot of this Uranian energy. So a lot of you are really going to be unknotting a lot of the knots that maybe have been holding you back when it comes to this Uranus retrograde energy. So certainly expect that, especially I'm doing this video in November of 2024. So expect it. I'm going to keep it up because this is a timeless video, but expect there to be a lot of changes in your life, especially wherever this retrograde energy is placed, especially within the next 2 years, is really going to start you on a very different trajectory. All right, my friends, I hope that was helpful in some way, and I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye. Okay, so let's talk about the most popular retrograde that there is, Mercury retrograde. It's definitely one of the more prevalent ones. It happens 6 times a year. 20% of the population has their Mercury retrograde. And it goes retrograde so often we can't even really sweat it. But what does it actually mean? Let's break down some themes, okay? Now, just so you for those of you who aren't sure, Mercury in astrology is the way we think, the way we speak, the way we understand our environment. It's very linear. Um, but this energy brings out like the non-linear side, right? Having to do with the retrograde, right? I find Mercury retrograde people to have the funniest senses of humor. Like honestly, so funny. If you have a Mercury retrograde who's got heavy Sagittarius and heavy Jupiter in their chart, so funny. Just very funny, very different way of thinking, different way of communicating. So Mercury retrogrades, a lot of very famous comedians have Mercury retrograde because it's that unique way of thinking, right? That people are thinking about, but they don't say. You know what I mean? So it's fun in that way. But let's talk about what else it means, some ideas, some experiences. All right. We like to do these just to validate our own experience, and to also call ourselves out sometimes and see what we need to maybe work through. So when it comes to being outgoing, you can actually be a lot more introverted because Mercury energy, as the ruler of Gemini and Virgo, can actually be quite outgoing. All right. So there is a chance for you to become an ambivert as well. You may later convert into being more of an extrovert. And it causes you to be more in touch with your intuition and your gut instincts, right? A lot of you are very, very intuitive. That's so not Mercury style because Mercury is very cerebral, right? But when he's retrograde, it's very intuitive. You might have difficulty assimilating to what's considered the norm, which could cause you to feel deemed unique or on the fringes or statistically an outlier. Now, because Mercury does rule, um, Gemini rules the third house of our early education, you might have felt like a little a little unique, a little out of the box, a little different than your friends. You might have realized that you learn differently, in that space, or maybe you had very unusual friends when you were a kid. Mercury also rules Virgo, which is sixth house energy. You might be very attracted to sort of different things when it comes to the way you like to work. Things you might be very attracted to things that are out of the box, a little out of the ordinary. If you have any sort of health issues in your life, they might not be like run of the mill. They might be a little like out of the box, things like that. But just, again, this very sort of introverted sort of energy. And because you're a more profound thinker than most, right? Mercury retrograde certainly does create that kind of energy, much more profound thinker. You could find yourself going over things in your head, which can cause you to be put on an automatic like loop, right? Like the mouse wheel, and you ruminate about something that made you feel uncomfortable. It's like, oh, they said that, and then I said that. Or why did I say that? Oh, wait, they said that. And then they said it like this. Oh, wait, what did they really mean by that? You know what I mean? And we go over things over and over in our head. Now, at times you could feel like it's hard getting the words out the way that you're thinking about it in your head. Mercury retrogrades often, and this is not uncommon, even just alone, especially if you have an additional retrogrades as well, but where you really feel like you have to give some thought before you speak. And it's not like think before you speak, or you might say something that you regret. It's not even about that. It's about literally wanting to think about how it is that you express words, right, before you say it. But you can have a hard time doing that, which can be frustrating because then you could feel like people aren't patient with me or people don't really care to hear what I have to say, and then it could be that kind of cycle. Your sense of humor is offbeat and sometimes a lot more vivid than others. And it's a good idea to give yourself more time to read things thoroughly and to take a moment to complete a task before you hand something in or before you sign something or anything like that. because they could be a little bit of a spacey element. I'm not calling you an airhead or spaced out. I'm saying that you could space out when you're reading things that, you could be reading a form or reading a chapter in a book, and it's like everything is great, 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 and all of a sudden it just becomes wah, 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 wah. You know what I mean? Or it's like you're just spacing out. It's like, okay, hold on, let me reread that. Let me go back to the beginning. And just know that about yourself. There's nothing wrong with that. So if you know that you have to conquer, right, a lot of copy, right, a lot of reading of something, do a piecemeal. Do a piecemeal, make sure the light is right. Um, and give yourself time. Give yourself time. Don't wait until the last minute to do things. Especially when anything you come into documents, writing, or any other work, going over it over again, to give yourself extra time for that. Blind spots are something to be careful of because they could fog your judgment regarding your own behavior, but even regarding others, right? So you do want to be a little careful of that. You could have blind spots when it comes to the messages or the signals that people are sending you when it comes to what it is that they're saying, right? So even though you're intuitive, you might be there could be a blind spot, especially if you have very strong feelings for someone or about a certain situation. And this is different from denial, okay? This is not denial. It's a blind spot. It's like you don't see it. And it's not because you, on some level, recognize it. It's that literally because of the inverse, you're not able to actually like factor it through your mind. So it's literally a blind spot. Okay, so that's something. So ask questions, and especially if it comes to anything having to do with work or anything having to do with relationship, to kind of say, just so that I understand correctly, this is where we're at, and blah blah blah, right? Just so that you want to always make sure that you're on the same page, right, with with whatever situation you're in. Now, sometimes you could come off wrong to others because your communication is on a different level. And when I say wrong, I mean people might say you're aggressive, you're standoffish, you're a know-it-all, or you're condescending when you don't mean to be that at all. That's not at all what you intend. At all, right? So this could be your experience. Comprehension, verbal cues, reading the room, and overall how you take in data can often be flipped, could often be the reverse. So how you receive information can be different from others. So, and this is something that's really important to pay attention to. You know, this is tone, very important, you know. Obviously the difference between like, oh, nice to see you, or it's so nice to see you. Same words, different tone. So really paying extra attention to tone, but you don't want to read into things that aren't there as well. Because, on the flip side of this, like somebody could be really, really nice but you could take it the wrong way, right? So you want to just be careful. Like something's communicated, you may not take it the way that it's intended. Now, seeing things from a different perspective than others can make you something of a genius in this energy. There is no doubt about it. Especially if this is in fifth house, 11th house axis, third house, ninth house axis, great. Really, really good for like work, creative energies, anything like that. Your communication style could seem quirky until people get to know you. By quirky, I mean quirky, whatever that might mean. Go like a little off or a little, fill in the blank, whatever it is. Try to have a better relationship with your conscious mind is really important. And not just staying very deeply entrenched within yourself is important. Now, you have the ability to be ultra talented when it comes to writing, music, singing, poetry, math, marketing, becoming an excellent public speaker, anything techie, anything at all techie, excellent for this. And look, having, any sort of tricky retrograde energies in your chart, can be challenging, but it's actually something that's going to help you in the long term, especially with this particular retrograde. And it's because it gives you a higher chance of success, right? Because you end up having to work harder than others, which means that you have to go after what you want a little more aggressively and you don't back down easily and you have the energy to do it. So you end up in that higher space than so many people who do not have a retrograde. So you have to really look at it like that. So that is what I have for Mercury retrograde. I hope this was helpful, guys, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Hi guys, so let's talk about Jupiter retrograde. So in astrology, Jupiter is the planet where we expand our horizons, where we get to explore our philosophies, our religion, our politics. It represents very connected to foreign land, foreign travel, importing and exporting, writing, well, it's very connected to writing, publishing, marketing, advertising, the law, legalities, local governance. It's the manifestation of father energy as well. Okay. So here, when we have it retrograde, we need to make tweaks to things that have to do with our beliefs, our boundaries, anything that we feel like we need to tackle in order to grow and expand ourselves. So we could need to tweak eventually at some point our religion, our beliefs, our politics, circumstances pertaining to the law, legalities, local governance. Jupiter retrograde a lot of times ends up manifesting simply as people changing their majors in college because Jupiter naturally lives in the ninth house, and that is an energy that rules higher education and higher mindedness, really looking at those belief systems and making some sort of tweak, Um, and it could always feel like a little bit of a drag having a retrograde because you don't get to fully access the benefits without working really hard, especially with Jupiter, which is the great benefic. But Jupiter likes everything to be effortless and cheerful, and having this retrograde says, okay, well, I might have to work a little harder. I might not, and the thing is with Jupiter retrograde, like the drive-by interpretation is you could feel less lucky. You could feel that way, but then you don't really understand why it is that you feel less lucky. So let's just talk about some of the themes, some of the experiences, again, always just to validate, better understand ourselves. So your viewpoints can be vastly different from other people, especially your immediate family, right? Very different from father energy. Very different. You could absolutely have just your own thought process. There could be times when you aren't open to speaking your opinions because a lot of times you're like, I'm going to get attacked. What's the point? Your optimism can certainly be very muted at times where you feel more pessimistic. Pessimism is a lot easier for you to access. Doesn't mean that you can't be optimistic. Doesn't mean that at all, but it could be muted. So, and so like an example of this is like, all of these things are connected, by the way, right? I mean, so this is could be very connected to, for example, your childhood. If you were really excited about things, you were really like, yeah, I'm really excited about this thing. And then the kibosh was put on it, like where you were told, you're not going to be able to do that. You can't do that. That's not going to happen. Please. That's not going to work out. Any sort of like negative things put upon you when you were feeling optimistic, that could really, we're like Pavlov's dogs after all, right? To a certain point, we end up being like, okay, oh, wait, is that optimism? Let me not get carried away with that, right? Because it's probably not going to work out, that kind of thing. So you do want to be careful of that. You can become hesitant when it comes to taking a bold risk. Learning in terms of a formal education could feel either hazy, or you can have some delays. They could be, changing, like I said, changing of majors, changing of schools even. And because it's a very social planet, you can feel like you aren't on the same page as the others in that area of life. So whether it's your class, whether it's your peers, whether it's your coworkers, this, whatever it is, people who are like in the same grade as you just feel like you're not in that same place. What's best for you educationally, and you need to do things on your own path and on your own clock and calendar. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of people who have Jupiter retrograde, they're adults who go back to school, later in life. or they do homeschooling, or you know what I mean? Like there's something very like unique or different about how it is that they do it. They come around to their belief system in their religion and their personal philosophies in their own time, their political views in their own time, right? It's all about that. And that's something that you just have to accept about yourself and love that about yourself. Religious views can go through many phases, from changing beliefs to fanaticism to becoming an atheist straight up to absolutely losing faith, right? At times you have issues with integrity, laws, and scruples. So remember, this is a lifelong transit, right? So Jupiter retrograde, we have to be super careful, especially if you have this in the ninth house, which is where Jupiter lives. We want to be careful. Ninth house, 12th house. We don't want to get arrested. We don't want to go to jail. We don't want to do any of those things, right? We just want to be careful having to do with those sorts of things. Or just having those experiences in your life, right? Even connecting to other people, we just want to be careful of that. Taking social responsibility becomes essential as you learn how to access your Jupiter. You are not as hopeful and somewhat cautious as someone whose Jupiter is direct, right? I mean, you're just not, you are you have there's more pessimism naturally in your default space, right? And again, this doesn't mean that you're a negative Nancy and want. It just because of experiences. So part of dealing with your Jupiter retrograde is saying that, not everything is supposed to work out, and whatever hasn't worked out, rejection is protection, and I'm meant to do something different. And I can't lament what didn't work out. I have to say, forge ahead when it comes to trying to create some sort of new reality for myself, right? And it really is accepting that and trying your very best not to be negative about it, the best that you can, obviously. You may have issues seeing other people's points of view, and you could tend to turn your nose up at traditional beliefs and traditional religions. You certainly can do that. You could feel like you are on an unquenchable quest for the truth, whatever that means. The bigger picture could be a hard thing for you to conceptualize because you can get very caught up in the minutia of the everyday, of the today and this week and this month, where it's very hard for you to conceptualize, wholly so, 5 years down the road. When you get more connected with your Jupiter, you begin to walk the path that's right for yourself, and you may feel comfortable taking baby steps, but eventually learn how to go after whims, you know. Baby steps are the way to go for you, right? And so it's like baby step here, baby step here, baby step. Then that becomes a lot more comfortable. And eventually you will learn how to go after things without needing so many of the baby steps, right? Sort of like training yourself. But baby steps are very necessary, at least initially. And don't fault yourself for that. It's just simply who you are, right? Taking things piecemeal, not everything all at once. You can end up excelling down the line in higher education. You can become an excellent teacher or a life coach. You can have an excellent chance of being a great writer, editor, publisher, online entrepreneur, lawyer, politician, religious leader or spiritual leader, whatever, organized or otherwise. Ultimately, you will be pushed to learn how to access your personal abundance and prosperity. And even though those situations can be challenging for you in the moment, you master them eventually without a problem. And having Jupiter in retrograde in your chart doesn't mean you won't have luck or opportunities. It's just going to take longer for the abundance to actually come into your life, can feel stressful. I mean, I do want to acknowledge that, but the good thing is that you won't be stagnant in life just because you have a retrograde energy. And another cool thing about having retrogrades is an advantage to develop your skills on a deeper level, which puts you in a position to be prosperous, whatever that might mean for you, right? So, generally speaking, you can access that Jupiter direct, but, going through these themes with a lot of honesty and saying, yeah, you know what, let me work on that. Let me work on this. And that is really all that it takes to access those other energies in there, right? Okay, my friends, that is what I have for you for that. Hopefully that was helpful, and I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye. Hey, let's talk about Saturn retrograde. This is probably my most requested one. Mercury retrograde happens all the time. People want to understand that, but Saturn retrograde is probably my most requested. Now, Saturn brings karma, right? So anything that needs to be resolved must be worked through, regardless whether this is retrograde or direct. So know where that Saturn is in your chart. Know what house it's in, know what sign it's in. Understand it's in that sign and in also in the sign that rules that house. So understand that. And that's where things need to be resolved. It just so happens that when you have Saturn retrograde in your chart, you just have a lot of internal work to do on yourself. And this energy retrograde causes us to go inward with Saturnian themes like structure and boundaries and discipline. So much of your focus that goes on here is on a karmic level. It's very, very, very karmic placement. There's no question. And with a disciplinary planet like Saturn, it's crucial to seriously cut yourself some slack and give yourself some grace, because this kind of placement can cause you to feel guilty just for breathing, just for being. The guilt that you could feel is crazy. And it's just there, right? So it's something to be called out. Remember, it takes time to get to where you want when there are difficult placements in your natal chart, or when, and I hate to say call them difficult because I don't think anything's bad or good, but this could be a tricky one. But this certainly doesn't mean that you're doomed in any way. Okay, so let's just get that out of the way. But let's discuss some sort of themes. All right. Again, these are no one size fits all. It depends on what else is going on in your chart. But I find that the themes and the experiences talking about it can be very validating and very like, oh yeah, I do tend to do that. Or yes, I've always done that, but I've been working on that. I feel like I'm sort of moving past that, that kind of energy. So let's get into it. So Saturn retrograde, you have a tendency towards disorganization rather than being structured in a Saturnian way, right? So you have Saturn, and like, especially if you have like Saturn in the sixth house. So, oh, I'm so, you must be so organized. It's like, no, man, actually, I'm not. Like, so you could be disorganized, or likely there's an organization to your disorganization, right? And if that's resonating, you know exactly what I mean by that. This causes you to be more in touch with your rebellious side rather than coloring within the lines in society, right? I mean, you have no problem. You know what? It's funny because they say Uranus retrograde is more Saturnian and Saturn retrograde is more Uranian. And Uranus is very like revolutionary energy. This is I'm me, and that's it. And if you don't like it, too bad, That's that kind of energy, right? And so that's very Uranian, right? So Saturn retrograde can be, very very Uranian. You have issues regarding boundaries with others because you have to learn how to set limits. Now, vulnerability can be difficult in terms of expressing your feelings and letting others know, like really, really know you on a very real and raw, intimate level. Practicality could be something that's super tricky with you. Dealing with everyday realities can sometimes be annoying and just a burden and just something that you don't want to do, right? So again, this could be like that rebellion energy. And it's like, no, I just want to do this. I don't want to have to do that. I don't want to have to do this, that kind of thing. Discipline can definitely be an uphill battle when it comes to your habits and staying dedicated to your goals. Imposter syndrome tends to hold you back, guys. Oh, and here, I hate to see this, right? So, in other words, it brings out your insecurities plus irrational fears regarding being an authority on a subject or being the right person for a job. It's like, I can't do that. I'm not able to do that. I'm too different. I don't have what it takes. And all of these self-deprecating, negative, useless narratives, right? Because there's no value add in them, right? Really trying to get in front of that. Now, at times you can slip into gloomy states a little easier than others, and you can have issues with dealing with limits as well as restrictions. So we do have to be careful of this when it comes to any sort of, especially any sort of addictive behaviors, especially anything that runs in the family. anything that runs in the family that way, you have to be careful of that. There could be problems with commitment, and those problems with commitment could cause you to be fleeting in relationships, and you might not even realize that you are, but where you can have a very hard time opening up your own energy in that relationship, where you're raw and honest in a way that makes the person feel like you're really in it with them. And so the relationship, you could push the relationship away without even realizing it, right? Even if it's the other person who leaves, they're leaving because they feel pushed away by you, if that makes sense. Yeah, generally there are some unresolved issues with parental figures, predominantly males or the dominant biological parent. You may feel, yeah, I want to say it like that, the dominant, not right, because Saturn rules the 10th house, which is the manifestation of mother energy, right? But Saturn is a very paternalistic energy as well. So it's very interesting kind of cross section, So really, whoever the biological parent, the dominant biological parent, who's the more dominant, you may feel like a late bloomer when it comes to maturity. You are meant to break generational and inherited vibrations. So you guys are one of the several game changers of the zodiac. Especially if you're a Capricorn rising, because Capricorn risings have that Aquarius energy in the second house, and the original ruler of, well, I don't want to run down that rabbit hole of Aquarius was, it's Uranus and Saturn. But this idea of breaking generational cycles, but just in general, you are meant to break generational cycles. So, the anger issues, the addiction issues, the divorce issues, yeah, anything like that, you're meant to break it. There needs to be a balance with your competitive nature. At times you could be overly driven, or you just don't have the energy to even compete with yourself. It's just like, I can't even do that. Boundaries need to be set because you can be prone to being stepped on by others. And with this energy retrograde, you could feel confined if others are, really pushing into your space. If you feel like, other people are like, too in your arena, like makes you feel very uncomfortable. You could feel like you're constantly dealing with karmic situations, one right after the other. Some Uranian themes could come up due to accessing that Aquarian sign of Saturn, as I just mentioned. So you could seem more radical, unpredictable, very opposed to authority. When feeling off kilter, you can go inward. It could cause you to be antisocial instead of putting yourself out there. You tend to deal with fears and self-doubt and guilt on a chronic level. Learning that you need more substance. Just get rid of that. Yeah, yeah, you need to let go of those fears. You eventually know how to balance your relationships with authority. You eventually figure it out. You eventually figure out, your responsibilities, where that other person stands. You become masterful in things that are connected to the idea of integrity. So if there is anything in your life that lacks integrity, you are meant to not only face it, but to master it. So whatever that is, getting in your own way in relationships, any sort of addictive tendencies, you will master these things, being controlling, being standoffish, whatever it is, however you might be not your best self, you have the energy to master these things. You eventually gain a very one-pointed focus on creating your legacy and generational abundance. So at some point, you're going to become very sort of hyper-focused on this idea of recognizing that I'm breaking generational patterns, but I'm establishing new ones. And I want to make sure that what I'm establishing is here tomorrow and for, for every generation after me, right, in perpetuity. And it's that kind of thing that you really want to manifest. You can become very skillful in things like business, being an authority on a topic that you've mastered, social media expert, of course, marketers, financial planner, anything to do with building, being the head of a company, building wealth that lasts generations. I mean, this is one retrograde placement that is very marked for that. So, which is really, really cool. So, this is what I have for you. I hope this was helpful in some way. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye. So let's talk about Mars retrograde. So Mars is that warrior planet, right? He rules Aries. So he's what gives us our energy, our gumption to go after stuff, right? Mars rules Aries, which is the energy of the leader, leadership energy. I got this. I'm going to go after it. How are you going to do that? Mars direct. I don't know, but I'm going to go after it. Mars retrograde is like, could be a lot more trepidatious when it comes to moving forward in things, because these things, that gumption and that go after energy is very internalized, right? It's on the other side of the sun. So let's just talk about we're going to talk about some themes, some experiences, and we do these things just to make us feel like a little validated. Oh, that's why I do that. And also say, oh, you know what? I do that. Let me look at that. Let me look at that. Let me give that a little bit of work. So having Mars retrograde, some things are pretty likely that you experience. So first, there could be a challenge with your identity where you don't really know how to connect with your own individuality, right? Because remember, Mars being the ruler of Aries, which is that energy of I am, and this is who I am to the world. It's like, where do I belong? Who am I supposed to be in the larger dynamic of the world, right? It could certainly give you that challenge, right? You could struggle with being action oriented. You could have some trouble tapping into risk taking and adventurous parts of your own energy, where it's like you become too scared. You could struggle with analysis paralysis. Oh, I can't do that. You can have imposter syndrome. No, 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 I'm not going to be able to. Nobody's going to listen to me. I can't do that. That kind of thing. You could strain to express yourself at times, right? And you can have an issue accessing your more passionate nature. Really can be very difficult. Passion, I don't even mean just an intimacy, but what do you feel really passionate about? And we all have that bone, but having Mars retrograde can make people around us feel like when they're in our presence, if we have our Mars retrograde, that we don't have a definitive passion, or that nothing really excites us, right? To that point, right? That kind of energy where it's a lot more internalized. There could be an issue with motivation and getting pumped to go after what it is that you want. And you could even feel lethargic a little bit more than most people. You could feel incredibly awkward when it comes to asserting yourself. Like, really not even sure how to do this. I don't know how to be in the front, the leader in front of the room. Fear can absolutely hinder you from learning how to become courageous and daring, right? And that go-getter. Fear can really inhibit you. I want to times this energy by 10 if you have your Chiron in the first house or Chiron in Aries. Like that could be like, because those energies is very similar to having Mars retrograde. Often you have issues with going after what you want because you stall out when it comes to taking action. And therefore, ultimately, you end up repressing your desires so that you don't have to go after them. Your sex drive could go through extreme peaks and valleys, right? It's probably not like on any sort of, level playing field, like, even keel. You probably notice within yourself. Instead of being direct, you could exhibit resentful, passive-aggressive ways of dealing with others. Again, you have to pay attention to the sign in the house placement that you have it in as well. You could have a problem controlling or using your temper properly. Okay? Because remember, Mars rules war and battle and weapons and weaponry. And when we're in a fight with somebody, the weapon that we're using is our tongue, right? It's like weapons like this. And so with that Mars energy, right? So Mars direct, it is this warrior-like energy, but it's warrior-like energy with the endpoint of recognizing what is good for us and what's not, right? And then driving the argument in that direction. So having Mars retrograde, we can have a hard time seeing it that way. So we can argue in a pretty dirty way, but again, it's not based in malice. It's based in fear. It's based in self-protection, right? You could have that problem controlling your temper properly. I mean, that's real. There is a tendency to hide your anger and then explode out of the blue, which throws others off because they could be thinking in that moment that everything was just fine. And where the hell is this coming from? I don't know what's going on. You could turn very, I don't want to say you could become triggered very easily. It's more about it being triggered and very sensitive to judgment or those who try to give you feedback. You may not accept feedback very easily. That could be a real problem, right? In your energies, accepting anybody's feedback, even if, constructive feedback, it's like, no, you could feel like they're putting you down. You've been really difficult, very too uncomfortable for you to be able to, to really navigate there. At times you can feel so much anxiety that it puts you in a state of being hyper vigilant. And that could be difficult when you're dealing with people in relationship because it's almost like you could be looking for things that are wrong. So we want to be careful there. Unfortunately, you may have to or have had to deal with physical and unwanted sexual situations in your life. Now, this does not have to be like the R word per se, as I don't want them to ban this because that would come up as a banned word. But it could just be like something that in that arena made you feel really uncomfortable, and that could wear many hats, right? So apply that to your experiences as you see fit. Trauma causes you to learn how to set boundaries. Eventually, something kicks in and you become a warrior and a master of your own domain. There's no question about that. Once you tap into that Martian energy, you become an inspiration for others and you do become very strong due to fighting nature in order to self-preserve, right? In order to be able to persevere in your life and preserve yourself, you have that warrior energy. So you do become this inspiration and this strength, right? To be acknowledged. Very determined as well. Eventually, this retrograde forces you to become determined at one point in your life or another. Now, this is very anecdotal, what I'm throwing in right now. Anecdotally, what I've recognized in my clients, my many clients, is that Mars retrograde gets reasoned out throughout their Chiron return, their second Chiron return. And the second Chiron return is usually in like mid-40s into early 50s, right? Give or take a couple of years, right? If you know your Chiron, then you'll know. If you have your Chiron in Aries, then you've been in your Chiron return since 2020 until 2027. If you had your Chiron in Pisces, you were from 2012 to 2019. It's a 7-year transit. We only have 3 in our lifetime, 3 real ones. I don't want to make it about Chiron. I'm going to do a separate video on that. But during the Chiron return is where I notice a lot of my clients who have Mars retrograde really unpack it and it becomes such a strength for them. So, that's something to look forward to if you haven't been through that yet. The intense Mars energy could cause you to emphasize very Mars-like things, Martian things like wrestling, sports, being a firefighter because Mars rules fire. Mars rules weapons as well as like surgical utensils. So become an excellent surgeon, an ER doctor, somebody who responds well to some sort of like acute, like dangerous situation. Fighting for others' rights, debater, business strategist, anything like that, because you take that Mars energy and you end up conquering it. So you end up that it ends up becoming such a focus point of strength at a particular point in your life. It's going to be different for everyone, right? But this is, again, anecdotally, what I recognized in a lot of my clients who have this is in that time span, right? Mid 40s to the early 50s, right? And that's typically around our Chiron return. It's like right before that next Saturn return, right? The first one being in the late 20s, the next one being in the mid 50s, like that sort of in between window, there being this wisdom, and a lot of the retrogrades get resolved. Mars is typically that first one that does that. Okay, so I hope this was helpful. Thanks for hanging with me, and I'll see you next time. Okay, so let's talk about Venus being retrograde. It's pretty rare natally. About, 7 to 8% of you have this retrograde. So I don't expect as many of you to be tuning in as maybe for like Mercury retrograde. That inverse cycle is every 18 months. So, you're one of like the 7 to 8% of the population who do have this retrograde. Now, Venus is all about happiness and feeling good, our aesthetic, what we love to do for fun, our sense of self, self-worth. Um, Venus is very connected to parenting energy. It is connected to money as well, being able to make money. We call her the baby benefic, whereas Jupiter is the great benefic. But we need her to move forward, right? To appreciate the beauty in life, to feel really good about ourselves, to have the money, to do all of these things. And it's very connected to how we relate to other people. It also shows, what we like in our love lives, and when it comes to our finances as well. So when she's retrograde, it can cause you to express that Venusian energy in a more introverted way, right? A more internal way. So let's just talk about some experiences, some themes for validating, number one, and for also, calling ourselves out, which is what we have to do in order to grow, right? But this could definitely be a tricky one. So it's so important to understand. Now, for a lot of you, there could be issues with seeing the value in yourself, which could end up causing you to be very self-deprecating, putting yourself down, thinking less of yourself, thinking that people think less of you around you, even if they don't. You're very, very sensitive to hurtful words. If somebody said something to you when you were at a very vulnerable point in your life, those words can ring over like a ball on a hamster wheel, right? Over and over in your energy. Now, because experiencing feelings of well-being can be challenging for you, you could find yourself overcompensating by buying expensive things or surrounding yourself with things that are beautiful or that feel good, or could even be to the opposite, where you purposely don't surround yourself with those things because you don't feel like you're really worthy, where it's like, well, that's not for me. I don't need fancy. I don't know, because there's that worth thing that's going on. It's going to manifest a little differently for each of you. It depends on what else is in your chart. Now, when it comes to relishing in fun, you could have a really hard time letting loose, just letting go, letting your hair down, just having like a freewheeling, easy peasy time could be a little difficult for you. Now, what you find fun might be private to you, or what is considered an offbeat style of entertainment, or what is considered a little out of the norm for other people. You find fun, things that you enjoy, that's fine. You're your own unique sense of self. But that's something worth noting, where if you feel a little bit like the outsider, because retrogrades, depending on where they are, and depending on what sign it is, it can make us feel like the outsider in a situation, right? So the things that you like to do may be a little different. Some sort of unique fashion style is very associated with this energy retrograde, since this planet does indicate what kind of clothes we like to wear. So having Venus retrograde could cause you to choose very unique threads. Unique, and when I say unique, I mean maybe like antique or very futuristic, or you might really just have your own quirky style, anything like that. Um, but and in the same way, um, same thing can come for. Well, when it comes to relationships, it's a little bit of a unique thing for you guys, right? Because your love life, just in general, might be very confusing because at times you are emotionally inward, right? You can be very inward, um, and that could be a little difficult, right? Because you can be confusing to your partners because you're inward. You have a very imaginative internal life, especially when it comes to like your view on sex and intimacy and your views on connecting with others and other people. Um, this is something that, you should be mindful of. There can be an issue with only seeing what you want in relationships. So it's really difficult to distinguish who is good for you. Is this person good for me or are they not? Because you can easily see again only what it is that you want. There can be a tendency to seek the impossible in love to the point of not looking at the truth or having impractical expectations to fulfill. You may even find yourself in scenarios that are going nowhere fast. They're just not going anywhere. Like some sort of unrequited love situation, people who want to keep the relationship a secret, anything like that, especially if you have this in the sign of Pisces or in the 12th house. You have to be a little careful there, right? Being completely superficial and looking for someone out of your league can also be an experience that manifests itself. Sometimes getting caught up in relationships, you have a hard time separating due to being attached more to the love story than to anything else. And it could be that love story that dissolved and went south a long time ago that maybe you really didn't want to accept. Relationships can feel complicated due to feeling suspicious and very cautious of unions. I could feel that could complicate things for you. And it's like, what came first? Right? Because you could go after people who you thought were good, but you only saw what you wanted to see, and they ended up not being good, and then you end up getting hurt, and then you end up being cautious, and then there ends up being that cycle, right? And social situations could make you shy and sometimes cause you to come off as offbeat to others, and whatever offbeat, like to that social situation, And financially, you can struggle with having balance and even be sneaky about your money, right? Um, is when Venus is direct, you have a nice buffer from feeling some of these themes so intensely, right? So, in other words, when Venus is behind the sun, you are protected from the intensity of this planet. But while it's retrograde, then that brings from when it's retrograde. So, having that natal Venus that's reversed causes you to experience like the unfiltered aspects of what this energy could be in its most raw form. So any retrograde in the chart can be challenging, right? The good thing is that you'll eventually master a lot of these themes, right? It's just with any retrograde, you become more niched in that specific area, right? So, if you have this and it impacts you in the relationship sector, you're meant to eventually figure it out. And you will likely figure it out through another energy that challenges you to the point of figuring it out, if that makes sense. So it's nice. I mean, that energy is nice. Do I want to say anything else about this? This one, Venus retrograde, is very connected to, well, a lot of retrogrades are very connected to our past life experiences, but Venus retrograde is very connected to past life experiences, right? There could have been issues when it comes to finances. There could have been issues with greed or overindulgence or just snobbery, or there could have been issues with relationship, right? Um, where you took advantage of people or you weren't very demonstrative in relationship, something like this, like in a past life kind of energy. And it's like, oh, great, But again, none of these retrogrades are such a horrible thing. It just means that you have to work a little harder in that part of your life. But then that ends up becoming an area that you master, that you become really, really good in. So that is something that you want to embrace when as you're working through that Venus retrograde. So I hope that was helpful for you guys. See you guys next time. Okay, so let's talk about Chiron retrograde. Now, Chiron, the wounded warrior, right? The wounded warrior. Where was he? Was wounded in his foot. And I don't want to get into the whole mythology because I am going to be doing a separate video on Chiron. But knowing Chiron retrograde is important because he's a wounded warrior and he was able to heal everyone but himself. And where our Chiron is represents the area where we experience our deepest wound. Now, our Chiron wound is established between the ages of 7 and 8, right? We bring it in and it's in our birth chart, but it becomes established in our energy between our 7th and our 8th year. It's very connected to our early environment, right? So, it's important to understand not only what sign you have it in, but also what house you have it in. But what does it mean if you have it retrograde, right? So there are some themes that we could talk about. This idea of introspective healing. You experience your wounds more internally, and this can often lead to deep self-reflection and a real desire to understand your pain at a very profound level. Healing processes may be less about like external validation and circumstances than about internally understanding your pain, your experiences. It's a very introspective kind of thing. Karmic themes rear their head when we're talking about Chiron retrograde. This can suggest unresolved karmic issues or wounds from past lives. There may be a sense of revisiting old pains in order to heal them in this lifetime. And you will, at some point, feel a pull toward understanding your soul's journey and lessons related to your wounds, which is a really good thing. Alternative healing methods will definitely be a thing for you at some point. And obviously, if you are watching this video right now, you have already arrived at that, right? As those with Chiron retrograde may gravitate towards the unconventional, towards holistic healing practices, seeking methods that resonate with your inner experiences rather than mainstream approaches. So anything spiritual, especially Chiron, especially when you have that Chiron return, so many people turn to astrology and tarot and just trying to understand, because what happens is during our Chiron return, which typically happens from our mid 40s to early 50s, we feel on a very deep level spiritually that there's more going on here. There's more going on. Now, a lot of people will turn more toward God and more toward their religion, and some people will do that and also turn toward, alternative ideologies and belief systems, right? Just to better understand self, right? It's always about more than anything. It's just to really understand health, our own internal health and our own self, right? Chiron retrograde can also really highlight this idea of empathy and compassion. This enhances empathy, allowing you to connect with the pain of others very deeply, right? So if you have your Chiron retrograde, you feel people's pain very deeply. Now, this can lead to a strong desire to help others heal, often stemming from your own experiences. And that journey of healing can involve guiding others, using your own personal experiences to support those facing very similar circumstances. And in your life, there is a lot of self-discovery through pain, and that's just part of your path. So there is a tendency and a likelihood of you being able to turn your pain into wisdom, and you can learn very valuable lessons in life through your struggles, leading to personal growth, leading to that greater self-awareness. Then again, that you become a type of teacher. And this process often requires facing and accepting your own vulnerabilities, ultimately fostering a resilience within yourself, right? And just creating this strength. It's very profound strength. And there is this integration that will happen. Having you Chiron retrograde, there is this integration of wounds, right? You need to integrate and accept your wounds as part of yourself. And that acceptance can transform that pain into that strength and into that insight. And embracing those aspects can lead to a more holistic understanding of your identity. And it doesn't really ever become a thing where I really have to figure out who I am. I really have to figure out. It's sort of like you start to look at yourself as this holistic being that's constantly changing, where we don't have boundaries when it comes to, well, I don't want to say boundaries, borders, when it comes to our soul growth and how it is that we engage with the world and how we engage with our past and how we feel and how we think. We're less, Chiron retrograde, you really don't have the desire to put yourself into a box and say, this is me, this is who I am. It's more about accepting how you're constantly changing and you're always going to be evolving. And being really good with that, being really good with that. Um, this is all about an internal journey of healing and integration, for you guys. And we all have Chiron somewhere, we all do. The only little caveat I will say about Chiron retrograde, worth noting, is look, bad things happen to good people. Some good people are in bad places at the wrong time and things happen. And that is a very tough pill to swallow as part of the human condition, right? If you don't struggle with any real overt pathologies, it's, suffice to say that most people would agree to that, right? We don't like the bad things happen to good people. Having you Chiron retrograde, though, is a little harder for you to understand that than most. And so, therefore, when you experience something that you consider unfair or challenging or really, really hurtful in your life, it's very difficult to accept. And what happens is when we don't accept it, we can end up projecting a version of that same pain onto other people. And we don't want to. We don't want to hurt anybody. There is no malice. There is no vindictiveness about it. It's not. It's that pain. It's that fear that drives that kind of response, right? So understanding your wounds and not poo-pooing them, especially those of you who are tuning in, if your Chiron is in your first house or it's in Aries, that placement, those two placements are the least motivated to actually be very honest about their wounds. Not that you're lying about them, but it's like, what's the point? What's the point? Well, I'm going to cry about my childhood. My childhood was years ago. Everybody did the best they could. I forgive my mother and father. I forgive that grandparent or that person who hurt me. What's the point? Toothpaste is out of the tube. I can't put it back in. I'm just living my life and moving on. And all of that's fabulous. You're like, I forgive. All of that's great. That has nothing to do with your Chiron, though. Nothing. Your Chiron is a soul level emotion. You are like a sponge. The sponge is like right here. Okay. And when you're a kid, you're a sponge to your environment. And this is not about passing judgment on our parents or calling anybody out for hurting us or not being there in the way that we needed. It's about just recognizing, like, hey, I came into this life with my own soul and my own needs. Everybody probably did the best they knew how in the moment. Good, bad, or ugly, doesn't matter. But the bottom line is, I didn't really get what I needed. And that's why I have this wound that I have that was generated very early in my environment. And I didn't have the tools in my toolbox to unpack them and work it through. So I built life on top of it. But that doesn't take the wound away. And forgiving, you know, to just say, yeah, well, A, B, and C did the best they knew how. That's awesome. But the pain that you feel from not being seen, not being heard, right? Especially if you have first house or Aries energy, that's not going to be moved. What happens there is then you have a compromised sense of self and you end up making decisions that don't really honor you the way that you should be honored. And you end up pulling people into relationship in your energy that are not ultimately that good for you, that aren't going to build you up, that aren't going to bring you to that leveled up space that you do deserve because you've been chosen to be here in this lifetime. We all deserve that, right? And you understand the soul level, right? There's a difference between that visceral soul energy and what it is that we're saying in our, through any sense of our cognitive mind, you know. They're two different animals. And I'm not saying don't forgive and don't like let bygones be bygones. Absolutely. Forgive. Absolutely. Because the kind of energy that we're talking about anyway, the kind of pain that we're talking about anyway, If your father calls you up and says, honey, I'm so sorry for doing X, Y, and Z to you when you were a kid, that's not going to do a damn thing for that Chiron pain. Doesn't matter. It's going to do a lot maybe for your heart or a lot for, your mental health. And you can have that open conversation then and maybe find healing with you and that person. But it's more about, Chiron is more connected to the energy that you absorbed as a young child based on what you were given. Unintentionally, or intentionally, it doesn't really matter, right? So hopefully you understand the difference there. But I'll go into more of that when I do the Chiron, the actual Chiron video. And hopefully I'll get to that next week. All right, guys, thanks for hanging with me. See you next time. Bye-bye. Let's talk about Black Moon Lilith retrograde. Very hard to find info about her retrograde online. I know a lot of you have emailed me, especially after I did that Black Moon Lilith video. I don't know, what was it, like 6 months, a year ago, maybe even now. So who is Black Moon Lilith, right? She's our dark spot. She's the darkest side of the moon, very dark side of the dark and deepest part of our subconscious. She is where we can get in our own way. And it's like we don't even mean to do it. Could go back and check that Black Moon Lilith video that I did. I think it's still posted just to find out more about her and the mythology behind her. But let's talk about some themes that manifest when we have our Black Moon Lilith retrograde. So you have a very unique and complex relationship when it comes to themes having to do with power, sexuality, and autonomy. All right. So again, let's just talk about some themes here so that some of these things will be experiences you'll feel validated, and then you'll also feel like, all right, hey, I could actually look at that a little bit, right? So this idea of introspection and inner shadow work, you can experience you will experience a very deep inner journey regarding your shadow self, often engaging in introspection about your desires and your motivations. And this placement can indicate a tendency to confront hidden aspects of yourself, leading to personal growth and transformation. But it's through self-acceptance, right? You just accept things about yourself, which is great. Repressed desires here, there can be a real struggle with expressing primal instincts or desires, which can lead to feelings of shame or guilt. Right? You might find it challenging to embrace your sexuality or assertiveness openly. You feel very held back, whether it comes to intimacy or whether it comes to like really going after something. And that repression can cause a real internal conflict where your desires for freedom become very real, but yet you feel very constrained. If it's not societal norms, then it could certainly be by your own personal beliefs. Your own personal beliefs can make you feel very held back. Then we have to look at the idea of empowerment through vulnerability. You will eventually learn that true empowerment comes from embracing vulnerability, like really embracing it by confronting and accepting your darker aspects. That's how you reclaim your power. And that process often involves breaking free from societal expectations and even your own expectations. But a lot of times our own expectations, a lot of times our own expectations come from societal norms. It's like, oh, we're supposed to be married at this point, or be working and doing A, B, and C at this point, or have a child, or whatever at this point, or this is the way we're supposed to feel or be, And it's like, okay, maybe ease up on yourself a little bit, if that's your experience. Because again, that idea is very real for you where you can feel very constrained by those societal, which then obviously can become your own personal beliefs. So it's all about embracing your own authenticity. And really this idea of challenging norms, because this placement can easily signify a rebellious spirit that questions traditional roles and traditional norms. It's like, what's expected, but then you question it. Things that are considered traditional, especially regarding anything pertaining to like gender or sexuality and personal freedom. You may have your own definition of it, but then you might not feel totally comfortable because you could feel very held back and again, very restricted, yet you have your own belief system. So, you could easily find yourself advocating for alternative perspectives and challenging societal expectations, could be like a real rebel, which is great. There's nothing wrong with that, but just make sure you're a rebel with a cause and not without a cause, where you're not rebelling just to rebel, just to be a contrarian, right? You want to make sure that there's something concrete in those beliefs. Also, what comes up here is the idea of creative expression. This can really enhance creative potential, particularly in exploring anything that is what we would consider taboo subjects or themes that reflect the darker aspects of the human experience. This could have to do with incarnation, obviously anything to do with the occult, so astrology, anything to do with, reincarnation, the afterlife, anything having to do with like deep psychological perspectives as well. I do find that people with Black Moon Lilith retrograde is very similar to Pluto retrograde here as well, very similar in that there's like a natural gift towards like detective work, psychology, astrology, going deep behind the scenes into things, very good energy that way. Um, Very good. Anything having to do with art, writing, any sort of form of expression, especially any sort of form of expressions for you guys, if you have Black Moon Lilith retrograde, it's like an outlet, right? An outlet of energy. So doing something creative is a release for you. Whereas somebody with their Black Moon Lilith direct, it could be stressful, right? So having to sit down and write something or create something, whatever. But for you, it's like an outlet. It's something like that. Um, yeah. So I do like that for you. And then finally, let's talk about like relationships and boundaries. There could be a tendency to struggle with setting boundaries in relationships, especially relate anything connected to like intimacy, personal space, you know. Um, you could definitely kind of oscillate between craving connection and fearing vulnerability. And it's like because you want the connection and you want the intimacy, but you fear that idea of being vulnerable, right? Because Black Moon Lilith, again, it's like a different octave of Pluto. We don't say that a lot, but it kind of is. If you know her mythology, I mean, she was originally Adam's partner, right? And she was just messy and loose, and she cheated on him, and she wanted to go and tinker with the devil a little bit. Right? And then so she did that and she got kicked out of Eden, and then she was replaced by Eve, and then she realized that by tinkering with the devil, she was just spawning these children, and it was like this endless birthing process, and it was just horrible and monstrous for her. Actually, it was. So she just wanted to go back to Eden, right? But God was like, no, you cannot come back in. You had this opportunity and you ruined it and you bastardized it, and you followed the wrong trail, and now you want to come back in, and it's like, oh, but wait, I didn't know. She's like, I didn't know. But she had to live with those decisions, right? And so she was blind to what her actions ultimately ended up bringing her, right? And so we're blind wherever our Black Moon Lilith is. And so we can act in ways that we don't see, but that other people can tell us we're being a certain way. We have to be very mindful of that and respect the fact that while we might not agree 100% with what they're saying, we have to look for the value in why might they be saying this, you know? Why might I be in this situation? What lessons do I need to learn, right? But it is this idea though of, you know, that fear, right? That she initially felt when she got kicked out. She was happy first, but then when she wanted to come back in because she started to just live this horrible existence, And she was told, no, it's that fear of if I screw up and then I let myself be vulnerable, my world is going to fall apart, right? And so having Black Moon Lilith retrograde can make us feel really scared about being super vulnerable to the point where we open ourselves up to relationships that could be not so good for us, but that are safe for us to get into because we know at the end of the day, then we're not going to end up needing to allow ourselves to be totally vulnerable because there's always going to be some sort of stress or animosity or divisiveness, right, in that experience because they're and that's comfortable. That could be comfortable for you because then you never have to let your guard down. You never have to allow yourself to be vulnerable because who in their right mind would let themselves be vulnerable to a messy energy? Who would let themselves be vulnerable to somebody who is is not faithful or who's kind of abusive or who gaslights or who has some narcissistic tendencies or who, you know what I mean? Like there's a safety. I know that sounds kind of nuts, but it's on an energetic level, it's self-preservation. It's how a lot of people with particular placements, this happens to be one of them, will protect self. I'm going to protect myself by not allowing myself to get hurt, by not allowing myself to ever get involved with anybody who is so amazing that I would feel like I have to allow myself to be vulnerable. But I can't allow that because if they see my vulnerable side, they're going to see how small and pink and frail and freaking scared I am of just like life and everything. And then they're not going to want me. And then they're going to discard me. And I don't want to run that risk. So I would rather keep my guard up. But who's going to accept anybody who keeps their guard up? Well, somebody who's keeping their guard up, somebody who's messy. So it's just something to think about until we figure out that, oh, no value add there. Let me stop doing that. Because it's all a false narrative anyway. It's all a false narrative. Because at the end of the day, we're all amazing. We're all amazing. All of us. It's just a matter of like realizing our sticking points, you know? That's it. That's all it is. Realizing our sticking points, leaning in and then trying to unknot it, figure it out. Right? Because I like to believe, I choose to believe that God didn't make any junk. God didn't make any junk. So that is what I have for you guys. I hope that was helpful in some way. Thanks for hanging with me. See you next time. Bye-bye. Okay, last but not least, let's talk about the nodes, when the nodes are retrograde. A lot of you guys have retrograde nodes. Let's unpack this. I'm not going to go too deeply into what the nodes are, just because I'm going to be doing a separate video on what they're about. But in the birth chart, the lunar nodes is what we call them, the north node and the south node, or K2, uh, uh, Rahu and Ketu. Brain melt there for a minute. Rahu and Ketu, some of you may know them as that, represent significant themes related to life purpose, karmic lessons, and soul growth. And when the nodes are retrograde in the chart, it can add an interesting layer to how we understand them. So very connected to karmic influences. So retrograde nodes suggest a very strong connection to past life experiences as well as unresolved karmic issues. So you will feel a pull towards familiar patterns or behaviors linked to whatever your south node is. So you have to know what sign it's in as well as the house. Knowing the sign is only half the story. You also have to know the house and what sign is the landlord of that house? Because then you also have, so for example, if you have the south node in Scorpio in the 11th house, you have your south node in Scorpio and you experience the south node in Aquarius, the lens of Aquarius, because Aquarius is the landlord of the 11th house. All right. But, you will feel pulled towards those familiar patterns or those behaviors that are linked to that energy. So that south node energy, indicating lessons that need to be addressed in this lifetime. Now, because it's retrograde, there's going to be a lot of introspection and reflection, and you will engage in deep introspection regarding your life path and purpose. There might be a tendency to reflect on past experiences and how it all influences your current choices, leading to a greater understanding of your journey. And especially the older you get, the more you recognize the connectedness of it all. Like that had to happen when I was 16, so that I had that experience when I was 25, so that I had that experience when I was 37. So, do you know what I mean? And it's like that the connectiveness becomes very clear. And life is so beautiful when you understand it from that perspective, because then you really understand your journey, right? You really understand your journey, which I love that. Struggles with change can be a thing that you deal with. That North Node represents the direction of growth and future potential, while that South Node does signify the past habits, when you sort of past habits. So having the nodes retrograde can indicate challenges in moving towards the North Node qualities, potentially leading to resistance or difficulty embracing new experiences. And, depending again on like the house of the sign, if it has to do with like what you're meant to be doing in life, where you just struggle with analysis paralysis, you struggle with the imposter syndrome kind of situation, where it's like you can't even bring yourself to sit down and do something. Well, this is definitely a nodal energy where you have to unknot that. You have to unknot it, because the North Node and South, they are so important when it comes to our evolutionary story. I'm an evolutionary astrologer, and that's what I really kind of want to unpack. Ultimately, my goal is to make you all understand your Chiron, your nodes, and your Black Moon Lilith, so that you can understand how unbelievably instrumental they are in guiding our decisions in life, and really being mirrors into what it is that we need to look at, what it is that we need to heal, and where it is that we need to go, right? And so having your nodes retrograde is very hard to walk into that North Node energy. North Node is hard anyway, because it's always about, we're always being pushed with North Node energy. You're always being pushed to do something that's kind of like out of your wheelhouse. It's not in your comfort zone, but it's totally destiny driven, right? And we have to step into that. But having the nodes retrograde, it's like, oh, but I can't, I'm scared. And we have to really look at that and admit the struggle with change. It's like, yep, guilty. Struggle with change. Let's go. How are we going to work this out, right? You might need to take baby steps. Whatever it is, you have to face that bad boy down, right? Because it's all a false narrative. So also, having the retrograde energy, this whole idea of integrating past lessons, you're going to be called to integrate past lessons from your past South Node more fully before you can effectively pursue that growth that's indicated by the North Node. And this process can involve healing past wounds and releasing limiting beliefs. And that's so important. Any sort of limiting belief, it has zero value add for you as far as moving you forward in life. You're also going to be navigating life's themes, right? You will experience life themes that feel cyclical or repetitive, often requiring you to confront and resolve issues from your past so that you can progress forward on your soul journey. But it's like you feel like, here we go again. Same song, different tune. I feel like I've been here before. That kind of thing comes up a lot with Chiron retrograde. And this can create, and this is the funny thing about it though, the cycles coming up around, that creates a sense of urgency in your desire to address unresolved matters. And that is what really does lead to significant personal growth. It's like, you know what? I don't want to keep doing this anymore. I want to break the cycle right now. I'm going to get to the bottom of this. Why am I doing this, right? And because of that, there's so much potential for spiritual development, because retrograde nodes can enhance spiritual insights and intuition. You're a lot more attuned to your inner guidance, leading you to a deeper understanding of your own life's purpose and the actions that you need to take in order to align with it. Even if you're a scaredy cat, when it comes to making that happen, there's clarity there, which is, more than half the game, So having these energies retrograde in your birth chart emphasizes the importance of not only introspection and karmic resolution, but also this idea, again, of integrating past lessons on your journey so that you could fulfill your life's purpose. I mean, that's kind of a big deal, right? And so by navigating the challenges associated with the South Node and embracing the growth offered by the North Node, you can experience profound personal and spiritual development and really understand these. And when I do my deeper, I'm going to be doing a deeper dive into the nodes. And I will be discussing something that's called skip step, right? And so when you look, if you look at your birth chart, right, and you see whatever house is your north and south node in, I want you to look at what degree it is, and then go three houses, which would be a square, three houses in one direction, three houses in the other direction. And so, for example, let's say your north node and south node, they're always going to be at the same degrees. Let's say it's the retrograde. Let's say it's 6 degrees. Okay, so you go three houses in one direction, right? And so is there anything from, let me be easier. Let's say that it's let's say it's a 12 degrees. Let's say your nodes are retrograde at 12 degrees, okay? You're going to go in whatever house, go three houses in one direction. Is there anything sitting? Now, yours are at 12 degrees. Is there anything sitting in that house, three houses away, from 2 degrees to 22 degrees? You want to go like a 10-degree orb on each side. Go to the other side, same thing. Three houses away. Is there anything from 2 degrees to 22 degrees? And those will, what we call skip step. And those will be some deep challenges that you have to deal with in your life, where it's like blocked from you, that you need to work through. You need to actively work through it. All right. I'm like doing a real quick drive-by of evolutionary astrology here, but that's like very important to understand. Okay. So hopefully that makes sense. I'm going to go deeper when I do the video. So if it was a little confusing, that end part, don't worry about it. You will understand it next time. But that is what I have for you guys. I hope this was helpful, and I'll see you next time. Take care now. Bye-bye.